Exactly, we have completed our event. Sushmita madam, she is the fellow of, thank you ma'am for joining us and for accepting to be part of IEEE Hyderabad section. Welcome ma'am.
Ma'am, you are on mute, ma'am. Sushmita ma'am, you are on mute.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So thank you very much for having invited me. I'm greatly honored to be present on this occasion, particularly since it's Women's Day. And since it is a great collaboration between the Hyderabad chapter of Women in Engineering and the IEEE Kolkata section. So I look forward.
Okay, welcome ma'am. Thank you ma'am. Sangeeta, can we start? Exactly. We are on right time.
It's 1:59. 2 more minutes we'll see and we'll start, ma'am.
I see that your volunteers are very well versed on the details of IEEE and they're very active and dynamic. No wonder that you are doing so good. It's 2 o'clock.
Actually, this is the right platform. That's why I invited all alumni. So, and all our first year students also attending this program, ma'am. We have conducted through YouTube channel so that it's a good learning from eminent speakers like you and Vijayalata ma'am. So,
and it would be nice if after the event you could share the link with the Kolkata section. So we also have a YouTube channel, so we could put it there.
Definitely, ma'am, we will share.
Yeah.
WebEx link also I will share, and this YouTube channel also I will share. Definitely. Okay.
So may I inquire actually what is the duration of the talk, because the entire program has many other themes. So I'll limit my talk accordingly.
All we give only 5 to 10 minutes, ma'am. You have to take more time. Remaining all only we will give brief.
So 1 hour should be fine. 1 hour should be fine with the questions.
Yeah, ma'am, it's fine.
Yeah.
Sangeeta?
Yes,
can we start? Exactly, it's 2.
Yeah, okay, ma'am. We'll start. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, happy Women's Day to all. And as we all know, women is an integral part of society. And we say that educate a woman and educate a family. That's what, there is nothing in this world, or there is no limit to what we as a woman can accomplish. It's my pleasure to welcome you all the panelists and the participants for today's talk titled From Learning to Deep Learning, organized by IEEE Hyderabad Section WIAG and Education Society in association with IEEE Kolkata Section to celebrate International Women's Day 2021. As we all are aware of the advances happening in the area of machine learning and deep learning, and to enlighten us more into this advancing area, we have our speaker today, Dr. Sushmita Mitra, who is joining us from IEEE Kolkata section. So before we go with the ma'am's talk and all, so I would request Dr. Y. Padmasai ma'am, Chair IEEE Hyderabad Section WIAG, to deliver welcome address for this event. Padmasai ma'am.
Thank you, Sangeeta. Good afternoon to everyone present with us here today. It is with utmost pleasure that I welcome you all to the webinar on From Learning to Deep Learning, being organized by IEEE Hyderabad Section, Women in Engineering Affinity Group, and Education Society in association with IEEE Calcutta Section on the occasion of International Women's Day. To start with, I would like to talk a few words about the importance of this day. International Women's Day, which is celebrated on 8th of March every year. It's a day for celebrating women who have worked hard every day to achieve personal and professional goals. But the question is, why did the mere need of celebrating women's achievement arise? What is the big deal? A woman today does everything that a man can, and so a man's work is also to be celebrated. Then why are only women getting the credits? It is not because where we women are today, but where and how we started years ago. In truth, we are celebrating the women who had the courage to start something which was out of ordinary at the time. We had the determination to be a pioneer of change that has impacted our lives largely. But even today, there is a discrimination against women, or we would not have been talking about this right now. There are still women out there who are struggling at this very moment, striving to achieve something no other than woman has done before. This day is celebration of such women, not just that, but simply making it thorough so many years of life by striking a balance between the household chores and professional life is an achievement in itself. This day is about celebrating such women. Women like you and me, and if you are a guy, then it's about celebrating all the women in your life. Now I would not want to take much time of yours. I wish all you very happy International Women's Day and hope that you all acknowledge the sacrifice made and efforts put and determination every woman in your life has for your well-being and growth. I hope the day soon arrives when we will not have talk about it like it's a big issue. Only that will be a proof of the fact that our world has become a better place for everyone, irrespective of the gender. Anytime women come together with a collective intention, it's a powerful thing. Whether it's sitting down, making a quit, in a kitchen preparing a meal, in a club reading the same book, or around the table playing a cards, or playing a birthday party, when women come together with a collective intention, magic happens. That is the quote written by Rashad. I would like to extend my heartiest wishes to all the women. Happy Women's Day. Scientists today have completely different ideas of what machines can learn to do than we had 10 years ago. In image processing, speech and video processing, machine vision, natural language processing, and classic two-player games, in particular, the state of art has been rapidly pushed forward over the past decade as a series of machine learning performance records were achieved for publicly organized challenge problems. In many of these challenges, the records now meet or exceed human performance level. This has given a platform for the emergence and successive refinement of today's deep learning paradigm in machine learning. Deep neural networks had been developing steadily since at least the 1980s. However, their heuristic construction by trial and error restricted attempts at analysis. The performance advantage of deep neural networks were more theoretically understandable. Methods accelerated as the decades continued. Today, it is no longer shocking to hear of deep neural networks with tens of billions of parameters trained using databases with tens of billions of examples. Many academic researchers have opportunity to work in the emerging areas to develop various applications. I wish that this webinar stimulates vigorous new scientific efforts pursuing various opportunity leading to perhaps further discussions on deep learning. I wish you a very happy International Women's Day. With this, I would like to thank Dr. Susmita Mitra, Chair, IEEE Kolkata section, for accepting our invitation and be a part of this event and also sharing her valuable information to all of us. Thank you, ma'am, for accepting our invitation.
It's my honor and pleasure.
Thank you, ma'am, for your words. Now we'll move on for the next address. I request the most energetic personality of IEEE Hyderabad section, Dr. Y. Vijayalata, ma'am, Chair from Education Society, to address the gathering.
Thank you, Sangeeta. You made my day by saying most energetic.
Ma'am, you are really energetic.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. At the outset, let me wish International Women's Day greetings to one and all. And I would like to thank Padma Sai ma'am to extend the invitation to Education Society chapter. In fact, I would like to thank Sushmita ma'am also to accept our invitation. In fact, we have been interacting on mails only from on India Council platform.
Yes.
And ma'am, I've been listening to you from long time, but this is the first time I'm attending your lecture. So it's a great honor and privilege, in fact, our privilege to attend your lecture. Looking forward to hear from you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Sangeeta, over to Sangeeta.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. So now it's time for our talk for today's event. So before ma'am starts, I would like to introduce Sushmita ma'am. She's having a very vast experience, and to sum up into few lines, it's a very tough task for us. So to start with, the Dr. Sushmita Mitra ma'am is a full-time professor at the Machine Intelligence Unit, Indian Statistical Institute, Kolkata. From 1992 to 1994, she was with RWTH Aachen, Germany, as a DAAD fellow. She was a visiting professor in Computer Science Department of the University of Alberta. Then she has received the National Talent Search Scholarship from NCERT India, University Gold Medal in 1988, the IEEE TNN Outstanding Paper Award in 1994 for her pioneering work in neurofuzzy computing. She was the INAE chair professor during 2018-20. Dr. Mitra has been awarded the prestigious J.C. Bose National Fellowship in the year 2021. She has authored many books. One of the book titled Neurofuzzy Pattern Recognition, Methods in Soft Computing, and also Data Mining, Multimedia, Soft Computing, and Bioinformatics, published by John Wiley. In addition to this, she is a fellow of IEEE, Indian National Science Academy, International Association for Pattern Recognition, and a fellow of the Indian National Academy of Engineering and the National Academy of Sciences, India. She is an IEEE CIS Distinguished Lecturer and the current chair for IEEE Kolkata section. She has visited more than 30 countries as to give a plenary or invited speaker or an academic visitor. She served in the capacity of program chair, tutorial chair, and as member of program committee of many international conferences. Her current research area includes data science, pattern recognition, soft computing, medical image processing, and bioinformatics. Ma'am, you have a vast experience in all these areas, so we are looking forward to listen to your talk now, ma'am. Please continue with the talk, ma'am.
So first time I share my screen. Is it enabled? So let me try. No, it's not enabled. You see my screen sharing. Please enable that.
Padma Sai ma'am will do it.
Yeah, so as you do it, let me thank the organizers from the Hyderabad section, the WIE and the Education Society for having thought of me to be your speaker. And it's a very prestigious occasion, no doubt, because it's the International Women's Day. So before we go on to the talk, I like to say a few words about the Women's Day. Well, first of all, I like to dedicate my talk to my mother, the woman who dared to dream. It was not I who had to take the first steps. I was fortunate to have had such a mother who came as a refugee to India from Burma in 1942, and then she built her career to become a PhD in botany in those days, and she was a professor in Bethune College, a very reputed college in Kolkata. So it was because I had such a mother who was very much cooperative that my life was easy. In my life, I never encountered any discrimination, that I had been fortunate, and my mentor had been very nice to me throughout and helpful. And maybe I should thank my parents and my mentor and all those who guided me, the teachers, so that I could traverse this path so smoothly. And secondly, Women's Day is not only about women, because we must not forget the great luminaries, the men who played a major part in the society in those days. So in those days when child marriage was prevalent, widows were burned in the pyres of their husbands. It were great luminaries, particularly from Bengal during the Renaissance, like Raja Ram Mohan Roy and Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, who thought about women's education and widow remarriage and stopping of the custom of sati. And without them, we wouldn't be here. Our path has been very much smooth because of such luminaries. And thirdly, it's no harm in admitting that we all who are today together belong to the elite of the society, the Indian society. The Women's Day has no meaning to the marginalized, to the poor, to the people from the rural households, where there is still a huge gap between the men and women. So, I mean, I hope this gap will be closed with more and more educated women who, as mothers, will bring up educated children and enlightened children, such that this wide disparity can be minimized. So with that short thing, let me now go on to the talk. I hope I have not bored you with this small interview. So my talk will be on the basics of learning. So the topic of learning, you see, pattern recognition existed long before I started my research. So we had the term pattern recognition. Over time, the data size increased, and then you had big data, bigger data. Then the term data mining came into being, and then ultimately there was machine learning. Today you have deep learning and data science. So most of this is again old wine in new bottles, with the methodologies changing, the algorithms getting adapted so that you can handle larger and larger data, because the concept of data, the largeness of data, is very much relative. What was large 10 years back is small today. So in that sense, the algorithms need to be adapted and made scalable and workable in real time. So with that basic introduction, is it full screen? Oh yeah, okay. Yeah. So with that basic introduction, the contents of the talk will be as follows. We'll get a brief introduction to what is learning from the concept of machines. Then neural learning. When I joined PhD, that was in the early 90s. In those days, it was neural networks all over. And my thesis was also on neurofuzzy learning. So then after that, again, today we've got deep learning. So all these are interconnected. So I want to bring up this brief history so that you get a brief understanding, because considering that this group of audience encompasses different branches of engineering. So I thought this would be a good way to introduce the topic. So learning can be two kinds, basically. One is supervised learning, the other is unsupervised learning. Supervised learning can also be classification or prediction. When it is prediction, it's regression basically. Y is a function of x. So you have the values of x and the value of y is predicted, which is a number. And when it is classification, this y is no more a number. It is a non-numeric value. it is typically a class, and you need to predict it. You need to predict the class for the unknown input sample. Some typical applications would be the credit approval in case of a bank, medical diagnosis, analysis of the treatment effectiveness. So as I said, supervised learning would have a training data. So this should be accompanied by labels which indicate the class of the observation. So that is the output. The output is present. So the teacher, there is a kind of teacher present who is providing the output to train the machine. So that is supervised learning. Whereas in unsupervised learning, there is no such teacher. The system has to learn to distinguish between certain criteria in the data, certain patterns or groups in the data by itself, based on the measurements, based on certain homogeneity or interdependencies between the samples. Now, a classification method needs to be evaluated. It can be evaluated how good the classifier is. It can be evaluated in terms of its predictive accuracy, its speed and scalability, robustness, how good it can handle noise and missing values, the scalability to handle disk-resident databases, interpretability, because at the end it is the human end user, and the number of zeros and ones is not meaningful to a human end user. So you need some kind of rules often, which are more meaningful. So that is the understandability. And how good these rules are, because if it is too big a rule with a lot of ands, like if X is so and so and Y is so and Z is so, and then if you have so many ands, the human mind loses track. So if these are the two classes, this is a toy problem. So obviously you find that based on, there are a number of features which are M. So let's say height, weight, complexion, diet of some groups of people. And we find that if you map it to 2 dimensions in weight and height, it is very easily distinguishable. So you don't need the rest of the features. So this is called feature selection. You have some criteria to get rid of some of the useless features, because the more the number of features, the more the computational complexity of the algorithm, and you want to get the output in real time. So in real life, you can have a very large number of features. So a good way would be to get rid of the useless features, unimportant features. So in this simple case, you find that the weight and the height are sufficient to distinguish between the two classes. You can draw a straight line. So this is the decision boundary. So this is the classifier. D is the classifier. The straight line is the classifier, and this is called a linear classifier, because a straight line distinguishes between the two. Now, in real life, problems are not so simple. It need not be linear. It can be non-linear of different kinds. For example, here you have this kind of a non-linearity. Here it is concave, non-convex. Here you have concentric classes separated by this circle. And here you got the overlapping classes. So in this sort of problems, which mostly occur in real life, because real life is full of fuzzy things. So then you need the concept of fuzzy membership, and there you have the fuzzy classifier. So mathematically, you need to predict a class Ci based on some numeric values x1 to xn and the function f, and in regression, this Ci would be a number, whereas in classification, it would be a non-numeric label. Traditional classification algorithms include the nearest neighbor, the decision tree classifier, the statistical methods like Bayes classifier, and neural networks. So this is how the nearest neighbor classifier works. So suppose you have these two sets of samples, the red and the blue. So you want to you have a new sample, which is the white dot. You want to label it to one of the classes. So what do? You look at the distances, the proximity, the nearest neighbors of this point. In this case, we have taken 9 neighbors. So of these 9 neighbors, based on the distance, based on the distance of these 9 neighbors, we find that the majority of the neighbors belong to the red class. So the new sample, the white sample, would be assigned to the red class. So this is how the nearest neighbor algorithm works. In decision tree, you construct a tree by the algorithm under consideration. We won't go into the details of the algorithm. So now if you have such a table of the data, the database, this is a very simple problem. You can visualize it, but in real life, life is not so simple. So you have a huge table, which is very difficult to visualize. So you need a algorithm to form this sort of a tree. And once you form this tree, you see the meaning becomes very much apparent. So this is a problem of whether to accept or reject a credit application in a bank based on the level of education and the level of the salary. So you see that these are the accepts. That means if the salary is higher, then you're accepted for credit. And if your salary is low but your education level is higher, then also the bank selects for giving the loan. So in this particular case, this is the tree which forms. So this tree is more meaningful to the human end user, the concept of understandability or interpretability. Then came the neural networks, which was in our times or even earlier. So basically, it consists of a neuron. You've got the inputs and the connection weights. You do a summation of that. Then you apply a threshold function and you get the output. A more typical neural network would be a collection of such neurons in some architecture, and then you would compute the output based on some algorithms. So these nodes are connected by directed weighted edges. So in linear regression, whereas you get a linear boundary, in a decision tree, you get horizontal and vertical boundaries. Of course, there are other complicated models. We won't go into those details in today's talk. And the neural networks, on the other hand, have these kind of more flexibility in terms of these non-linear boundaries. Now, there are two important issues in learning, which are underfitting and overfitting, which people need to avoid. It depends on the amount of training data which is available. Also depends on the architecture, the size of the architecture you're trying to model. So if it is too big an architecture with too small a data set, then you have overfitting. So that means when you are training on the known data, the error will go on increasing, decreasing. However, the error on the test set may start to increase. So when the error on the test set of the unknown, unseen sample starts to increase, that is the place where you should stop your learning. So that region gives rise to overfitting or overlearning. And underfitting is when the model is too simple and both the training and testing errors are large. So this region would be underfitting, this region would be overfitting, and this region would be proper learning. So then unsupervised learning or clustering. So here there is no teacher, you don't know which class each sample belongs to. However, if you look at this example, of course it is very simple and very clearly marked out. You see there are 3 distinct regions. So these are the clusters actually. But in real life, things will not be so simple. That's why you need the different algorithms. So what they do, the algorithm tries to find out some homogeneous regions based on the distances. The intra-cluster distance should be minimized and the inter-cluster distance should be maximized. Then you get a good clustering. That is called a good clustering. So that means they are as compact as possible and as distant as possible to each other. But again, the concept of clustering is context dependent. So if you consider a family unit, typically you have a father, mother, son, and daughter. Now, what would be the cluster? If you consider it to be gender-wise, you would club the father and the son together and the mother and the daughter together. However, if you consider it age-wise, you would club the father and mother together and the son and daughter together. So again, clustering is context sensitive. So it depends on what is your objective, what is the end user's objective that the algorithm will perform. So a good clustering method will produce high quality clusters with high intra-class similarity. Similarity is the inverse of distance. So high intra-class similarity means low intra-class distance, and low inter-class similarity means high inter-class distance. In case of satellite images also, you do some kind of clustering, which you also call segmentation in image processing terms. So here it is in terms of the wavelength that is reflected. Some bands are sent and they are reflected back based on the characteristics of the material. So thereby the water bodies have different wavelengths going out in higher quantities, and the greenery have different characteristics, and the concrete have different characteristics. So this is a picture of Kolkata, not very recent, of course. So now you have more concrete. So this is the river Ganga and Hooghly river that we call. And so from this, the algorithm should be able to distinguish the different regions. So this is very useful in army operations. They have different sophisticated algorithms to analyze the satellite images and find out what is to be destroyed in the enemy region. Now, the number of clusters can also be ambiguous. How many clusters do you think there are? So you could say it is 2 clusters. You could say there are 6 clusters. And then you could say there are 4 clusters. So how many clusters you want, that is also important. So based on the number of clusters we want or we like to converge to, that decides on the quality of the clustering and the output. The simplest and most well-known and popular traditional clustering algorithms is the k-means. And that also has different outputs based on where you start with. So in k-means clustering, typically you have to pre-specify the number of clusters, which is indicated by k. So here, obviously, you see that there are 3 clusters. To the naked human eye, you find there are 3 clusters. But if you just put the value k for your algorithm, you can end up with different kinds of outputs. So obviously, this is the optimal clustering, as we can observe. However, there can be a suboptimal version also. So here also you find 3, but this is the suboptimal version. So what you will end up with, that is a problem in k-means actually, that depending on the initial seed values that you choose, the initial k seed values, you can end up with bizarre results. So this was the typical learning that is observed in all algorithms in general. This existed long back. So building on that came neural learning. So the neural network was designed to be analogous to the biological nervous system. So in the biological nervous system, in the brain, in any living being's brain, you've got the neuron, and the neurons are connected to each other. So you've got the cell body. These are the dendrites. This is the axon, which is feeding to the next neuron. So there are some neurotransmitters, some chemicals which are secreted, and they pass along here. And so obviously this neuron is connected to many other input neurons. So each is sending some of that neurotransmitter. So all that is coming to the input here. And then when the sum of those neurotransmitters exceeds the potential of this particular neuron, then this fires. And when it fires, it again sends some more of its neurotransmitter to its succeeding neurons. So this is how a message is passed typically. With this in mind, the artificial neural networks were planned. So this I have already discussed. So neural network is an artificial neural network which is not programmed. It learns by examples. It is non-parametric, and it has been found to be more efficient than powerful digital computers or number crunchers in cognitive tasks. So cognitive tasks like, say, well, you cannot compute as fast as a supercomputer, obviously, if you compute in your mind. But when you meet your friend after 30 years, you are more efficient than a supercomputer in recognizing your friend immediately. So that is the power of the biological neural network. And with that in mind, because the supercomputer would match the two pictures. So let's say a child at 10 years and a human being at 30 years, obviously if you match the two pictures, it will never match. However, a human being can easily understand. So that was the thing in mind when scientists started to think of a different paradigm altogether. So the von Neumann machines in the traditional computers, you have a single fast, powerful CPU, and error in one bit affects the result. There is a separate memory unit. In parallel processing architecture, you can have multiple complex CPUs. You still have one or more shared memory units, locations. However, in artificial neural networks, these CPUs are very simple, very slow processing elements, but there is a massive parallel interconnection, lot of redundancy, and there is no memory location separately. So all these interconnections, they store the information in a redundant manner. And since they store in a redundant manner, so if one link were to go down, the machine would not crash. As you see in the human brain, when you have when somebody has a stroke, so a part of the brain is affected. So often, if it is not affecting one of the major activity functional regions of the brain, the patient survives, but leads degraded quality of life. Maybe the speech is impaired or the movement is impaired, but the life goes on. So that is what is called graceful degradation. So that is the principle which is also imbibed in the neural networks. It doesn't have a stuck at 1 and stuck at 0 faults. It doesn't fail, but the performance degrades. And all the memory is distributed redundantly among the connection weights. So this is a brief history of neural learning. It started in the 1940s with McCulloch and Pitts. This was followed by the perceptron of Rosenblatt in late 1950s. However, Minsky and Papert in 1969, they came up with the exclusive OR problem, which, as you will realize, is not linearly separable. You've got the 0, 0 and 1, 1 in one class and 1, 0 and 0, 1 in the other class. So you cannot separate these four regions with one straight line. So this is called a non-linearly separable problem. And the perceptron was unable to solve that. So the limitation of the perceptron is that only for linearly separable problems it functions. So this limitation was proved by Minsky and Papert, and then interest in neural networks diminished in the 70s until in the early 1980s, the multi-layer perceptron with the backpropagation of error algorithm was designed, and then on it became very powerful in those days. Because when I started research, the multi-layer perceptron, everyone was trying to apply in their applications and getting some output, obviously. Whether correct or not, we don't know. Just like today, everybody tries to apply deep learning, whether you need it or not, whether you have the facilities or not. So that's the craze. So then, well, I need to point out here that when in those days, a Japanese scientist, Fukushima, was doing research on neocognitron in 1980s. It was heavily inspired by the working of the mammalian vision system. And I would say, looking at the deep network architectures of today, the convolutional neural network architecture, if you go back to those days and if you look at one of Fukushima's papers, which incidentally I also studied when I was doing my research, but these were so complicated in those days and we didn't have the computing facilities, so the model failed. It was too much ahead of its time. But that indeed was a precursor of the deep learning of today, that I must admit. However, the Western world doesn't, acknowledge that because, and Fukushima also hadn't been that vocal, I believe. So this was the Fukushima's model. You see, it's so very uncannily similar to the convolutional neural network. In the 1980s, he had designed that. So there were the abstraction of features. As you go deeper and deeper, you're getting more and more abstract features. If you look at one of his papers, you'll realize immediately. So then came the kernel machines and the support vector machines and so on. But Jan LeCun continued working with the with his model, and he continued deploying the deep neural networks in various tasks like handwritten text recognition. But his model was too complicated to implement in the hardware that was available in those days. So before we go into those details of deep network, let me give a brief understanding of how the neural network, the basic neural network works. So you've got the input and the output and the hidden nodes. And the output is typically the summation of the input. And you have a threshold function. And then the connection weight between a pair of neurons. If it is less than 0, that means there's an inhibitory effect. If it is greater than 0, there is an excitatory effect. And if it is 0, it has no effect. So typically, neural networks learn from example. They generalize from previous examples to new ones. So the capability or the power of a neural network or any learning algorithm lies in how well it generalizes to unknown samples, not to the training samples. And the concept of overlearning is there, just like overfitting, as we discussed earlier. And the neural networks can be of different kinds. It can be feed forward or feedback or recurrent. So there is another kind of learning which is in between supervised and unsupervised, which is also called reinforcement learning. So there is a reward signal or reinforcement signal for the correct output. You are not provided the correct output, but you have provided a reinforcement signal. And there are various learning rules: the error correction, Boltzmann learning, Hebbian learning, competitive learning. Competitive learning is mostly unsupervised. So these are some of the popularly used neural network models. They were used, of course. Today, many of them are not used anymore. So you have the multi-layer perceptron, which is now the basis of the convolutional neural network at the outermost layer. The Hopfield model, Kohonen model, which is clustering basically, radial basis function network, adaptive resonance theory, and neocognitron. So this is the basic single layer perceptron. So as I said, these are the inputs, these are the connection weights, this is the summation, this is the function of threshold and the output. So if you look at it geometrically, a very intuitive explanation is that you draw a straight line. How do you vary the straight line? By varying the slope. So that slope is dependent on this theta or the threshold. So basically you're getting a straight line y equal to summation of wixi. Which is when it is theta or the threshold, then it is this line. And if it is greater than theta, output is 1 this side. The output is less than theta, then it is output is this side. So these are the two classes. This is how you make the distinction. And the straight line is when you have equal to theta. Now what happens when you have multiple neurons joined together? So you can assume this is a very simple toy problem, of course, considering linear, everything linear. So real life, it's not so simple. So what happens is you're getting a straight line here, a straight line here. So each output is generating a straight line. So ideally, 3 straight lines can be combined to get a convex feature. But again, ideal case is not the real case because you have a lot of randomness involved. The weight values start from random values. So it's not always guaranteed that you will converge to this with just 3. So this is the theoretical explanation. So the learning rule of a perceptron is given like this. So the connection weight, which initially is a random value, and based on the error, the connection weight is updated. So the error is based on the actual error between what the target is expected to be, that is the desired output, and what the actual output is computed to be. So if there is no error in the output, that means delta is 0. That means the change in the weight value is 0. And that is a reward concept. So if it is correct, that is rewarded by not changing it. And if it is incorrect, so it is in the other direction. So T should be 0 and if A is 1, or T should be 1 and A is 0, then you punish it by updating the weight value. So if you have two layers now, so you get a region. Now if you have another layer, you could stand to get a non-convex region, because, or disjoint regions, because you are combining convex regions. And then you had the multi-layer perceptron, which had to have the back propagation of error algorithm. The error that is computed at the output layer is gradually back propagated, and all the weights along its path are updated, and ultimately again the new set of patterns come, and all these updations go on until convergence. However, we won't go into the details of the mathematics. So with that much of basic learning and basic neural learning, let's move on to deep learning. So AI, a subset of that is machine learning, algorithms whose performance improves as it is exposed to more data over time, and a subset of that is deep learning. So here in deep learning, you need to have large amounts of data and a large network architecture. Otherwise, it is suboptimal, it doesn't learn. And another major difference is that nowadays, what is not deep learning is known as shallow learning. That means it's not that deep. However, in shallow learning, machine learning, typical machine learning, you need an expert to frame the features. Handcrafted features are needed. Whereas in deep learning, the system automatically extracts the features given sufficient amount of data. Now again, machine learning can be divided into these two categories. These days, you've got the analog spiking neural networks. They are also computationally very complex, expensive. However, people go on doing some research there. And the researchers there claim that these are better. And the traditional neural networks, which are not spiking or continuous value, there within that you've got the deep learning. So according to Tom Mitchell, a computer program learns from experience with respect to some class of tasks T and performance measure P if its performance with respect to this task under consideration as measured by the performance improves with experience. As you are going on training, that is the experience, you should be able to improve. So that is when you are having learning. If your performance doesn't improve with experience, that means you're not learning. You're stuck in some local minimum and you need to take action. So here again, you've got the supervised, unsupervised, and reinforcement learning. You've got numerous applications in finance, healthcare, automotive, manufacturing, sports. So deep learning is a branch of machine learning that attempt to model high-level abstractions in data by using multiple processing layers with complex structures, and they are composed of multiple nonlinear transformations. It achieves great power and flexibility by learning to represent the world as a nested hierarchy of concepts, with each concept defined in relation to simpler concepts and more abstract representations computed in terms of less abstract ones. So as you go higher, deeper and deeper, you're getting the more abstract concepts, just like the human visual system, the mammalian visual system. Yeah. So this is the traditional model of pattern recognition. Here you have to have some set of engineered features. So you need a handcrafted set of features, the feature extractor, and based on these handcrafted features, the system will perform. So the classifier learns based on these handcrafted features, whereas in deep learning, it's end-to-end learning. You just provide the image, whatever the input, and the machine learns to extract the features. So for example, here, a very simple problem, it's taken from Zeller and Fergus. So this car at the input, so these are the lower level features. You see the preliminary, these edges, they are coming out in the first layer. Middle level, some structures are starting to take shape. And here at the higher level, you are having more complicated or objects being extracted as features, basically. So the higher layers of representation amplify the aspects which are important for the discrimination and suppress the irrelevant ones. So the image is an array of pixel values. So you learn the features in the first layer of representation, the edges. The second layer may be the motifs. You spot a particular arrangement of the edges regardless of small variations in edge positions. Third layer, you may assemble the motifs into larger combinations that correspond to parts of the familiar objects, and subsequent layers, you detect whole objects as combinations of these parts. The notable thing is that the features are not handcrafted but learned from the data, and the restriction is that the data should be large and the architecture should also be large. And so this is another example of human face, I think. So traditional machine learning needs handcrafted features. It performs better on small data, and deep learning performance improves as the scale of data increases. It depends on high-end machines, particularly GPUs, because you need high performance. And you don't need the handcrafted features in machine learning, you do. However, the problem is about the interpretability. The architecture of the deep network is typically like a black box. It's very difficult to understand what is going on, although the performance is almost as good as the human end user. However, I mean, in problems which are of security concern or sensitivity, like let's say medical decision making. If the doctor is not able to understand what is going on, it may be difficult for the doctor to use the decision provided by the system. So that's why a lot of research is going on in explainability of deep learning. So it's got many opportunities in different application domains, almost in all application domains today. Like in one time there was this multi-layer perceptron being applied everywhere. Now everyone applies deep learning. Now, basically you need gradient descent, and the learning rate determines the size of the steps we take to reach a minimum. Now you can, because it is gradient descent, you can get stuck in local minimum. That is a basic problem. Now there are different gradient descent versions: batch gradient descent or vanilla gradient descent, stochastic gradient descent, mini batch gradient descent, which is intermediate between the two. So different applications use different algorithms. The challenge is, one key challenge is getting stuck in local minimum, because this is not the gradient pattern that you get in most problems. Rather, this is the pattern you observe. Now, what are CNNs? So with that brief introduction, let us understand what are CNNs doing. So suppose this is the picture of a car, a van. So what does a computer see? A digital image, which is a collection of pixels. So it sees the zeros and ones, the gray values, the intensity values. It doesn't see the wheel, it doesn't see the windows, it doesn't see the sides, doors, or whatever. It just sees the intensities, which can be a number. So in color images, again, each pixel is represented by 3 numbers for the color red, green, and blue. So traditionally, the human end user, in traditional machine learning, the human end user would identify the features. So you describe the object as collections of shapes or characteristics. It could be the window, the wheel, and so on. The shape of the vehicle. And also for the human being also, you would be identifying all these features in the body, and you train the system to recognize these characteristics. But now if this is a little bit occluded, or if it is turned around, or there are other things in the surroundings, then it becomes more difficult. So the objective is now, once you have identified these features, these handcrafted features in machine learning, in an unknown image, you need to search for those features. So now these vehicles are in different orientation or occluded with a tree, and then how do you find out those features? It's difficult. Or when you're comparing these human characteristics, you see this is turning upside down, this one is lying on the floor, on the grass, this one with a hat covering. So then those characteristics of the human being are not discernible. So then it becomes difficult. That's why machines fail where human beings are able to perform. So with that in mind, Fei-Fei Li, the director of Stanford's AI Lab and Vision Lab, she started to think of something which could be done to solve this problem. So she thought, how do children learn object names? So parents do not teach this by showing characteristics of the objects. They just name the object and animal every time the child sees one, and the child learns to identify by looking at the object and hearing the name. So she thought maybe we need to do the same for computers. So again, this is a woman. So this is a very great example. So Li and her team launched the ImageNet project in 2007, collaborating with more than 50,000 people in 180 countries. They created the biggest image database in the world in 2009, 15 million named and classified images covering 22,000 categories. This was the ImageNet database at that time. So you've got so many images of different categories. This is a closer view of the vehicles. So all kinds of vehicles were in the database. So in 2017, the ImageNet challenge stood at 1.2 million images from 1,000 categories along with ground truth. Ground truth is very important in convolutional neural networks because it is supervised learning, and you need to have training. And the testing and validation was separate, because this is used for evaluating how good the network is. So there were 150,000 images in 2017. It is growing. So once the image dataset was ready, it was found that the data was suitable for training the ANNs. So convolutional neural networks were designed based on early study of cat's visual cortex, consisting of a complex arrangement of cells, with each cell being sensitive to different subparts of an image or a receptive field instead of the entire image. So there were local connectivity between neurons of adjacent layers to analyze spatial contiguity. Neuron is not sensitive to changes outside its receptive field. So this was the neuron. This was the neural network. Here it's a perceptron. So the ImageNet was used as for training the convolutional neural network, and Yann LeCun was going on with his research on his handwritten digit recognition. He continued from the 1990s. And this was the network he was working on, and you can well see that in those days it was infeasible to use it. But with the advent of the high performance architectures, things became feasible for Yann LeCun's model to become successful. The CNN that LeCun had designed had 24 million nodes, 140 million parameters, 15 billion connections. So this is some basic of convolutional neural network. You've got the image, you've got the kernels or the filters, then feature maps are obtained, and then filters are detectors of simple patterns. the size of the filter is gradually shifted. The filter is gradually shifted based on its pride. And these filters are arranged in many layers and they can automatically detect prevalent patterns. Smaller kernels produce better generalization. Each hidden layer has multiple feature maps. Max or mean pooling is done. Non-linear function is added, and the outputs become the input for the actual neural network using backpropagation at the outermost layer. And the structure of the CNN can be varied for different data sets and problems to learn complex spatial features and identify important patterns. So this is the full architecture of the ImageNet CNN. So this is some example of the different layers of the CNN, how it worked on a certain problem. Then the current boom in deep network research was fanned by this paper from Hinton, this algorithm. A new algorithm network of many layers, train each layer individually, backpropagation of errors was made unnecessary throughout the outermost. And efficiently they could train a large deep neural network. Then the GPUs came with this paper. And then life became very easy. So powered by GPUs, given the huge number of weights you needed to be trained, the huge number of samples that were needed to be for the training purpose, the GPUs were found to speed up the learning process by at least 70%. And this opened doors for training large DNNs that were previously impossible to train on the CPUs. Then this challenge came, the ImageNet competition. In this challenge, Krzyzewski, a student of Hinton, he won the challenge with a deep convolutional network. So in this challenge in 2012, they trashed the previous best error rate of 26%. So here, this sparked the interest of researcher communities to take up deep learning. And then gradually, all these teams in green are the ones using GPUs. So gradually that started to increase and the error started to decrease in these challenges. They go on holding these challenges every year, if you are aware. So then many models came in, the CNN, the deep belief network, deep Boltzmann machines, long short-term memory, recurrent networks, and so on. However, we don't have so much time. We'll be focusing on the deep convolutional networks. So you have, well, we'll be going to the next one. So convolutional neural networks are very similar to the ordinary neural networks. However, instead of the matrix dot product, we use the convolution operation. And you've got sparse connections. Neurons share weights instead of having unique weights. And this sharing introduces translational invariance. And poor local minima are rarely a problem with such large networks because you've got combinatorially large number of saddle points where the gradient is 0. The surface curves up in most dimensions and curves down in the rest. So almost all saddle points have very similar values of objective function. So it is immaterial which of these the algorithm gets stuck in. So while this is a normal conventional neural network, you can observe the architectural magnitude increase in a convolutional network. So you can imagine the performance you need, the architecture capability you need, and the amount of data you need. Otherwise, it's meaningless. So shallow classifiers require a good feature extractor. So selection of proper features is a dilemma, and handcrafted features, they require considerable expense because you need to have a domain expert, particularly in medical domain. It is very difficult to get a doctor to sit with you and annotate the data. It is very, very difficult. So, handcrafted features is out of question in real life large problems. And the key advantage of deep learning is in it learns automatically the good features. So the most important building blocks of a basic convolutional network would be the convolutional layer, the pooling layer which forms the downsampling, and the fully connected layers. And there are other layers like batch normalization, dropout, max out. So these are typically used for regularization or generalization. So with that brief introduction to CNNs, let's go at the evolution of CNNs. So error on ImageNet classification challenge. You see the AlexNet, the non-deep model had error 25.7. AlexNet in 2012 reduced the error to 15%. Then XylerNet 11%, VGG 7%, GoogleNet 6%, 4.5%, ResNet 3.5%, human performance 3 to 5%. So you see, apparently, mostly deeper networks, smaller convolution kernels, and many specific enhancements in the architecture enabled this huge improvement in the error rate. So here, if you compare with 8 layers, AlexNet, this is the error, and this is how the layer is increasing. With 8 layers, this model similar. Then you've got the VGG with 19 layers, the error had decreased. With 22 layers, GoogleNet, it was here, and then the ResNet, you see it's 152 layers, and the error was 3.5%. So the revolution of depth was there. AlexNet, VGG, GoogleNet. However, if you look at it closely, there are different local modifications or specific modifications. It's not just the simple deep. ResNet was so big in this scale that you cannot visualize it. So, however, it is not only the depth. Is learning better networks as simple as stacking more layers? No, because you see, this is an example of study. You see the 56 layer net has a larger training error and test error than the 20 layer net. So where is the key to this problem? That means you need some, now just increasing the depth is not the solution. You need to bring in problem specific modifications in the architecture, context sensitive modifications, and some other characteristics which are researched in deep learning. So overly deep plain nets or just simply deep nets have higher training error. So this is a general phenomenon observed. So this is on the CIFAR database. This is the ImageNet database. So with that brief introduction, I think we could summarize. So we have studied a very basic introduction to basic learning. Then came neural learning. Then came deep learning. However, today the focus is on introducing explainability in the deep network, which is called XAI, and also to make the network more efficient. Because see, you need to design more efficient hardware. You need to develop more efficient algorithms. See, because training a single AI model can emit as much carbon as 5 cars in their lifetimes. And you should also note that human brains can do amazing things with little power consumption. So the stress today is on developing more efficient algorithms and more efficient hardware. And to find out why a deep network is coming to a certain conclusion, the explainability issue. So with that, I thank you for your patience. I hope it has been understandable, and I am open to take your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. If there are any questions from the audience, it can be posted in the question answer section. We'll just wait for a few questions, madam.
I'm trying to expand this box. How do I stop the sharing? Because I can't see anything now. I'm just getting a small box for the participants. Yes, share. Okay, here.
Yes, ma'am, the screen sharing has stopped. Ma'am, what is the, is there any effect of this deep learning in the areas, I mean, in the area of, I understand nowadays deep learning is there present in almost all areas, but how about medical field? What is the effect of deep learning? What is the stage of deep learning, ma'am?
Yeah, so what happens is, you see, in medical, we are doing research in that domain particularly. So the thing is, today you've got huge repositories of data with the computers and all. Yeah, so you've got the images which are huge. So it becomes difficult to analyze everything for a radiologist. So what happens is, if you have some kind of an automated processing, it could serve as an assistance to the medical expert. So at the end of the day, what happens typically is the manual, let's say you want to find out where the tumor region is in a particular cancer case, let's say. So then the radiologist looks at the image and outlines the region based on what is seen in the CT scan or MRI or whatever. Now, to process huge volumes of data, it becomes very much, I mean, time consuming, and also the inherent bias in the human system works. So what happens is, if you can automate the process, it can be helpful, because the objective of this is to work as assistive intelligence to help the medical expert to do everything in real time. So the system should be able to provide some guidance, and it's not to replace the medical practitioner, but to assist, particularly in our country. Let's say we've got the remote rural areas where you do not have specialized doctors or specialists. So if the picture could be sent in a mobile, let's say, and then the some mechanism, or maybe the network would model something and provide the decision to the medical practitioner, who would then look at the explainability of the decision reached and arrive at the final decision. So that was, that is where it lies.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, ma'am. The reason why I asked that was because, as you had been mentioning, deep learning involves a lot of data collection and, I mean, continuous comparisons and learning processes there. Whereas medical science, we don't find the two cases similar. I mean, ditto, same to same. So it requires lots of practice.
So that is what is learning. So two cases need to be similar, but the main characteristics should be evident. And today
that ability to
huge amount of data is available. Only human being cannot analyze everything manually.
Okay. There's there is a video. I mean, sorry, there is a question from the audience, ma'am. What are the aspects of artificial intelligence other than machine and deep learning?
So you had those logic related things, predicate logic, all those things. Then the search algorithms. So those were the basic things previously. Now most of it is machine learning. So we studied when we were students, we studied predicate logic. I think these days, I don't know if you study. Then you had expert systems. So there are so many things in there. Expert systems are nowadays obsolete. So today it's mostly machine learning. So you're trying to make the machine learn, and all applications are using it.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, there's a question from Mr. K.S. Madhavan. Kolmogorov's model of keeping it simple by 3-layer neural network is in conflict with deep learning networks. Which model is correct theoretically?
deep learning is not proved theoretically. It is somehow working. Nobody knows why it works, at the end of the day. So that's why explainability is an issue. You need a lot of tweaking. The programmer who is working at it, or the designer or the researcher, has to do a lot of tweaking based upon the problem domain and the data set and the architecture available. It takes days and months often to get a good output. So what is theoretically proved in Kolmogorov's case is not valid here. Still people don't know the mathematical convergence of this. But it is working.
Yes.
You see, it is working as good as humans.
Yes, ma'am. We have a question from Rinmoy Bhattacharya ji. What are your thoughts on artificial general intelligence and its feasibility?
What do you mean by general intelligence? Would you please elaborate?
Artificial general intelligence.
Yeah, what
The
is
question can be, if you can explain it in the question and answer clearly, I'll get back to that again. Meanwhile, there's another question from Mr. Venkata Fanikrishna. Is there any rule to choose a number of hidden layers and neurons in each layer on a neural network, or is it trial and error process?
Trial and error, and sometimes at least in deep learning, it is trial and error. So it depends on your experience and expertise. So sometimes what you do is you build in some local connectivity, local connections based on what you want to do. Sometimes you want to focus your attention based on some saliency in the thing, and then you provide more higher resolution there. So you modify the connectivity there. So everything depends on the expertise of the designer.
Okay. So it depends on the expertise and design. So indirectly, it's a trial and error process. We keep doing it again and again to get the perfect thing. Yes, ma'am.
It's a very hard, hard work.
Yeah, true, ma'am. Yes. Next, we have a question from Mr. Kotana Janakiram. How do I interface deep learning or machine learning into wireless sensor network?
Wireless sensor networks, you would be. I haven't worked on that, but of course, you need not always interface deep learning into each and every problem, right? So in IoT, for example, they put. I have worked with some collaborators. So what they did was some kind of master-slave arrangement. I don't understand so much about the wireless communication, but what I understood was there were local networks in chips in the places where the devices were put in the sensors, and in the master also there was a network which was communicating with that, and somehow they were modulating the data which was coming in from there and doing some training. So something like that. But deep network, maybe in today's scenario, it is not possible because you cannot build so many huge networks everywhere. You get such deep networks, such high performance things only in your labs, high performance labs. It's not feasible to have it posted everywhere. So unless the scalability issue is handled, you get the smaller networks to give outputs in real time. Of course, people are designing that. You've got a mobile net which is trying to put in the network in the capable of working in the mobile environment. So there are research on this domain, however, but not in the present scenario. You may not be able to work with huge networks.
Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, the earlier questions continuation about artificial general intelligence. Artificial general intelligence is a concept where machines can model basic human functions like emotions and others. That can pass Turing's test.
So they were trying with neural networks. I'm not sure whether networks have been used for that. So that is a different. You would need so much data. You see, if you want a deep network, you need that data. So where is that data?
Yes, ma'am. So I think the questions are done actually.
Yeah.
1 minute. Yes, ma'am. So, yeah, it was such a good session. I understand deep learning is not a session where we can understand in a single day, maybe about a single hour is not sufficient. But it is very appreciative of you, ma'am, to start from the basics onwards. Like you had started with the basic feature selection, classification method, the decision trees. I remember studying all this in artificial neural networks. So you had taken us through right from the basics of artificial neural network, and the way how you interlinked deep learning, machine learning, artificial intelligence, all three was very easy for beginners like us to understand, ma'am. And not only that, the pictures that you have chosen to cite your examples, whether it is the case of the face or the bus, all that is something which we can really correlate in our day-to-day activities. So it was such a pleasure experience, ma'am, to listen to you. Had it been a 1-week workshop or at least a 3-day workshop, hands-on workshop, maybe we'll be able to understand more in detail, and we can even look into several case studies where at the end we'll be able to analyze the difference between actually how deeply learning can effectively be used in several applications. So thank you, ma'am, for taking us to through a journey right from the basics till like what we can understand in the deep learning, and also for patiently answering the questions. Ma'am, there is one more question before I pass it over to Sangeeta, ma'am, for vote of thanks. For classification problem, if I have labeled and unlabeled data, can I use clustering?
See, classification and clustering are different things altogether. So why should you mix up classification and clustering? So of course, in classification, you call it classification when you have labeled data. And there is another kind of learning which is used in deep learning. I didn't explain that because it is more, it is a deeper concept rather. There is one interactive learning or active learning. So we use that in medical images. What happens is, you see, as I said, doctors are so busy, they cannot provide you so many ground truths or annotations. So maybe you had 10,000 images, of which only 1,000 are annotated by the expert. So what do you do with the rest? So then there's a kind of learning which is unsupervised, or rather not fully unsupervised, something intermediate. So the user puts in some information, and the user is in direct interaction repetitively. So thereby there is some refinement in the learning. So maybe the doctor can be brought in to correct the errors that were obtained. However, it is always more expensive.
Yes, ma'am. Yes. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for patiently answering our questions also. And the beginning of your speech was dedicated it to your mother, being International Women's Day. You had said that this talk is dedicated to your mother, which was really very emotional and touching. I thank you, ma'am, for answering the questions, and looking forward for more sessions from you, much more detailed sessions. Your energy levels didn't drop down at all right from the beginning till now. Thank you, ma'am. Now I pass it over to our chair, madam, Padma Sai, ma'am.
So thank you, ma'am, for enlightening all of us, for spending your valuable time and sharing your knowledge. Thank you once again. I request KMM Rao sir to say few words about this event. KMM Rao sir?
He's muted.
Yeah, in fact, I've been working in data processing area for ISRO. I retired a few years back from ISRO. So, in fact, I sent one question to you directly.
I didn't notice. Okay.
How big is medical image processing group at ISI? That is one question. And are you working on the images of heart diseases using the deep learning or machine learning?
Are you working on medical? What was the first question? You said, are you working in medical images, especially on heart diseases? No, I haven't worked on heart diseases, but I have worked on mainly on cancer tumors of the brain and the lung, and also some amount on diabetic retinopathy of the eye. And currently, we are focusing on the retinal images and also on some other kinds of cancer tumors. So these are the ones I've worked on. However, heart diseases would need some amount of dynamic processing. You see, the heart is pumping dynamically. So I have worked on the static images.
Yeah, we can use echocardiograms and
Yes, yes. Sure. I
echocardiograms.
haven't worked on that. Yes. But it would be good. Actually, the main problem in working in this domain is data. You see, I've been running from post to pillar to post for the data, because you see, in the Indian framework, getting the annotated data in the medical domain is the most difficult part of the problem, because the government hospitals, you know, they have a lot of data, but it's not systematically maintained, as we all know. It's very much unlike the United States, where you see each university has a medical institute and an engineering institute in its same framework, where besides the population is low, therefore the doctors have a lot of time to do research, whereas in our case the doctors in the hospitals are over flooded with patients. They don't have time for research, although they would like to. So you see, there what happens is they have the real data. What we have to do with is the publicly available data, and getting into a proper collaboration and making the doctor to understand that what we are trying to do. You see, the doctor often doesn't have time. Of course, today we have a group of very good interested doctors who are trying to keep one day of their busy schedule for research purposes, but still it is at a rudimentary stage. We are trying very hard, and data is the main problem. We are stuck with the publicly available data. And what these Western countries do is they have their own hospitals, they take the data, they wring it out of all information, they use it to their maximum, they squeeze every information out of the data, then they release it to the public domain. So you are just left with comparing with other algorithms and not finding out anything interesting. So given the availability of data, we are always ready to work on it. So that's the greatest bottleneck.
For the deep learning and machine learning, a lot of databases are available in US. To train our networks, we can use those. For example, for breast cancer, we use the databases. Similarly, for ophthalmology, also we use the databases. Afterwards, when we trained our systems, then we use the local hospital data, like 200, 300 patient data, and then validated the results.
So these hospitals, please.
Your team at ISI on the medical processing.
So yeah, we have we also work with the publicly available databases, and then we also, and my group also participated in some of the challenges, MICCAI challenges that they organize every year. So a couple of our papers got among the top performing ones. So there what they do is they provide the data to the participants, and you have to build your model based on that data. And then once the training session is complete, they close it and they freeze your model. You're not able to work anymore on the model. So then they release the validation data set, and then they check how good your method is performing on the validation set, and based on that the competition occurs. So like that we got good mention there. One of them, it was performing among the top 4 among different international groups. So that was what we did in terms of competition. And then we worked on the TCGA, TCIA database, which is the largest collection on cancer data. And the local data, the problem is you need the annotation. So that is without annotation, how do you verify what is correct? So that's the greatest bottleneck. And what they do in other countries, in USA, for example, they have their own data. So they can always collaborate with their doctors of the same university, and they analyze that and solve many problems which the doctors want them to solve. The doctors have time for them, they have time for the doctors, and they get the data. And then once they have and it is more meaningful also. They can actually work on the problems that the doctors bring up. You see, we have got certain projects about to be sanctioned by DBT. It's going on like that. I mean, for 2 years, no money has come yet. So this is how it is creating problems. Until I get the money, I can't recruit somebody. I can't start the collaboration. I have the collaborations grouped up with Sankar Netralaya in South, and also with the Tata Medical Center Cancer Hospital. However, until the money is actually in place, everything is waiting. And you see, with the Corona crisis, everything is delayed now.
Actually, the procedure what they are following in US, especially I see in a number of places, the doctor's responsibilities for every image and also for every patient, they have the recorded analysis report. But whereas here, most of our doctors, they don't write they don't tag the analysis report with the patient data.
Yeah.
So because of that, when you use Indian medical images for the analysis, you don't know whether your result is correct or not. At that time, that particular doctor may not be sitting with you and explaining the disease. So that's
Right.
what is the problem.
And the doctor also doesn't have so much time. Our population is so high. The government hospitals are flooded with patients. So when do they have the time? They are tired as well already. How do they do their research? I mean, it's always a great effort on their part if they do research. Our population is the main problem.
Yeah, I have, in fact, I have interacted with the hospitals where within the campus, university campus, you have the medical school as well as engineering school. So they do the projects together.
Those in the private campuses, possibly that happens, but not in the government campuses. You have separate government hospitals and separate universities and institutes. So
Yeah,
we are
yeah,
trying to,
yeah, your talk is very interesting. You started with simple neural networks and then taken the students and participants to the.
Yeah, I thought because the background is very variant in such a platform. Yeah, so all kinds of engineers are here, so they may not be aware of the basics.
Yes, yes.
Computer scientists will know of all these things. It will be a replication for them.
Yeah, in IEEE webinars, we have participants of different variations. So obviously, we can't get into the specialized area and give a talk.
Unless it is from the societies. For example, I belong to the Computational Intelligence Society. So there I participated in a webinar. There I could talk on my research domain.
Yeah, correct.
There people are aware of the things. There if I deliver such a general level talk, it won't be that interesting. However, if I deliver the research level talk here, it wouldn't be appropriate.
Yeah, I do the same thing.
Yeah.
When I talk to my computer science people, I talk in a different way. But for general webinars, I talk in a different way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, ma'am. One last question from the participant, Pani Krishna. DL model trained using GUP can we use in normal CPU system?
I did not get the question. Please repeat.
DL model trained using GUP. I think graphical user interface. Can we use in normal CPU system? For example, Raspberry Pi for testing.
Yeah, that is for small problems, not for medical problems. That is for toy problems. Raspberry Pi cannot be used for deep learning in the real sense. That is for experiments at the college level.
Ma'am, could you suggest one good processor for medical application?
For medical applications, not like that. I mean, you have to get a good GPU or the cloud compute. These days you got the cloud, but cloud is also expensive, you know. It depends on how optimally you are able to use the cloud. Because if you use it suboptimally, you will be paying through your nose. Because based on the storage capacity and how much you are using, you have to pay. So GPU or then the cluster of GPUs, you need a lot of money. Typically, the universities are poorer than the industry. So what you need is the industry university collaboration so that you get the practical problems of industry and the theoretical mindset of the professors interacting together to get some real solutions. The industry can afford a lot of money. Universities don't have that much money, and leave alone the ordinary colleges. How it's not feasible. You need a lot of money.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Sangeeta, are you there?
Yes, ma'am. Now I'll request all the panelists to turn on their videos so that we can take one group picture. Vijayalata ma'am, Harivardhagini ma'am, Swati ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Turning on.
Anudeep?
Just a minute. Thank you. That's all. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am, for joining our session. Now I'll request Dr. R. Swati ma'am to present vote of thanks for this session. Swati ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. Am I audible, ma'am?
Ma'am.
Yes.
Good afternoon to one and all. I wish Happy Women's Day. Now it's time. Fine. I, Dr. R. Swati, Associate Professor, SVCE, on behalf of Women in Engineering Affinity Group, IEEE Hyderabad section, it seems to be a great honor to propose the vote of thanks to all who helped us in making this webinar a very resounding success. And we importantly thanks our today's resource person, Sushmita Mitra Madam Garu, for giving excellent coverage on learning, neural learning, deep learning. Ma'am, we are all gained knowledge on learning, classification techniques like decision trees and neural networks, and also we gain knowledge with differences between machine learning and deep learning, and also we learned about CNNs and GPUs from your presentation, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. And once again, my heartfelt thanks to you, ma'am, for sharing knowledge and experiences in learning. I would like to take this opportunity to record my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Y. Padmasai Garu, Chair, Women in Engineering, Affinity Group, IEEE Hyderabad section, for the amount of meticulous planning and guidance for smooth functioning of the webinar. I would like to thank Dr. Y. Vijayalata Garu, Education Society, and Dr. S. Harivardhani Garu, Vice Chair, Women in Engineering Affinity Group, IEEE. Thank you so much for your support, ma'am. And I thank members of Women in Engineering Affinity Group, IEEE Hyderabad section. I thank the wonderful participants who have turned up in such a great number. Thank you so much for your keen interest and participation. Once again, I thank all for your cordial cooperation. Thank you, one and all. Sushmita Mitra ma'am, thank you so much ma'am for your patience for answering question and answers and everything. We gained a more knowledge on deep learning and learning techniques ma'am. Thank you so much ma'am.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having invited me.
Thank you, ma'am. Many more such programs in future also. We need
Yeah.
your support to execute many more events in
Sure.
collaboration with the Calcutta section. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah. Have a very good evening.
Thank you, ma'am. Same to you, ma'am.
Thank you
Yeah.
ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you for giving this opportunity.
Thank you.